Is on to read.
Okay, we're good to go.
All right. Thank you for staying on. It's great to see that so many have stayed on the whole time. If you are just joining us, to let you know, we are drawing for a prize at the end of each session, and then if you have been on for all 3 sessions, you are in the running for the grand prize, a cash prize. But I'm very excited. We're running just a few minutes over, but that's no problem. Our next speaker is Danya Rumore. She is a PhD, is director of the Wallace Stenger Center Environmental Dispute Resolution Program. Woo, that's a long one. She's a research associate professor in the S.J. Quinney College of Law and research assistant professor in the City and Metropolitan Planning Department of the University of Utah. She holds a PhD in environmental policy and planning from MIT. Her work focuses on supporting effective collaboration, decision-making, and stakeholder engagement in the context of complex environmental and public policy challenges. I recently heard her at another conference, and it was just amazing as she talked about collaboration, which we focus on as a chamber all the time, but at the same time asking her to sync that in her expertise with conflict resolution. What business leaders should know with collaboration and conflict resolution. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Danya.
Great, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation to talk to you all. I am going to share some slides today, so I'll get those up for you all. Let's get those up. As you heard, I have way too many titles, like so many of us at academia, but what I really focus on is, as was said, just really helping people work together to solve environmental and broader public policy problems and challenges. And I run a program called the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program, but we think of the environment as the human environment as well as the natural environment. And that's part of why everything I have to say today is as relevant for business leaders as for, say, a natural resource manager. So first I want to talk about leadership. I know we just heard a bit about leadership, and I caught the end of Bruce's talk and really appreciated his insights. I firmly come from the belief that there's no such thing as leaders. Instead, there is just an act of leadership. Leadership is a verb, not necessarily a noun. And so we all have the opportunity to exercise leadership in every moment or not. And leadership, in my mind at least, is really the practice of mobilizing people to tackle tough challenges and thrive. And I pulled that quote from Ron Heifetz, who is a leadership guru based at Harvard. And he has a great book called The Art of Adaptive Leadership, which I highly recommend if you're looking for more readings. So I want to situate all of our conversation about conflict and collaboration in that context of leadership being about mobilizing people to work together to problem solve. And I want to premise this all with a basic understanding of conflict. Conflict just is. We don't always see eye to eye. We unfortunately have way too many examples of that in society right now, but it's just the reality. Like, we may not agree about where to go to dinner tonight. So conflict just is. We don't always see eye to eye. And the sooner we accept that, we realize that conflict can be really destructive. Again, we have lots of examples of that, but it can also be really productive and generative. And it's what we do with conflict that determines whether it's going to become productive or destructive. And ignoring conflict and pretending it's not there often leads to it becoming destructive. And at its heart, effective communication is really the core part of making conflict productive. And when we make conflict productive, we avoid it becoming destructive, right? So it's there, let's harness it and make it a good thing and not a bad thing. And even once conflict started to become destructive, relationships are being hurt, people are fighting, they're yelling at each other, we can still make that conflict productive through effective communication. And when we really need to reach agreement on courses of action, when we need to take action together or we need to do things together, that effective communication really entails collaboration. And as I'm going to talk about here in a moment, collaboration is a pragmatic skill and it's really based in interest-based negotiation. So I always like to emphasize collaboration is not just kumbaya, let's all get along. It's not just being nice. It's not just meeting or talking, or the same as public participation, which is important for public agencies to keep in mind. Collaboration is not you telling them what to do or them telling you what to do. I will hear sometimes from entities, I told them what to do and they're not doing it. They're not collaborating with me, not collaboration. And collaboration isn't the same as compromise. And I really like to emphasize this right now when our public rhetoric says we need to compromise more. Congress needs to compromise more. Compromise, as I'll talk about in a moment, shouldn't be the goal. Instead, collaboration should be the goal. And collaboration is fundamentally, like I said, a pragmatic skill. And it's all about making conflict really productive. And that entails multi-party problem solving, maybe just two parties if it's just two parties in conflict, but maybe hundreds of parties if it's a big public policy issue. And at the heart of collaboration is using interest-based, or what we call mutual gains negotiation, to address an issue of mutual concern. And I'll talk about that here in a moment. And at its best, collaboration is really a co-creation of innovative solutions. We have a conflict, something's not working. We don't see eye to eye. How do we work together to get to someplace better for all of us? And again, that's not kumbaya, let's all get along. It's really about interest-based negotiation. So why collaborate? The basic idea is we have to. Something brings us together into conversation or into conflict, and that's what we call an issue of mutual concern. Some opportunity, some challenge has brought us together, and that's why we're even talking to each other or why we're in conflict with each other. And we can have a shared issue of mutual concern even if we don't see eye to eye about it. And a great example of this right now is COVID-19, right? It affects us all in a public health sense. It affects us all in an economic sense. We all share that issue of mutual concern, and we all have to be part of problem solving, even if we have really different ideas about how to solve this problem. And why collaborate? Well, because we have to, and also there is really that opportunity to create value or to get to someplace better by working together. And when we don't work together, we lose value. We all lose. And again, I think we're kind of in that situation with COVID-19, where our lack of really strategizing, working together is actually leading to more economic impacts, more public health impacts, and we're not balancing those two as best we could. Collaboration really requires, like I've been talking about, effective communication. And part of that is identifying, or really good at communications about identifying mutual gain solutions. And the whole idea is finding solutions where we all do better by reaching agreement than we would have if we hadn't reached agreement. It requires trust and follow through. It requires creativity and open-mindedness. Like I said, at its best, collaboration really is a creative enterprise where we co-create better solutions than we would get to on our own. And ultimately, it's really about achieving your interests, doing well for yourself while meeting those of others. And that's again where that interest-based mutual gains negotiation thing becomes so core. So let's talk about this thing called interests. I'm throwing this word around, but we really need to give context to what it is. And I tell all of my audiences, if I leave you with a clear understanding of the difference between interests and positions and ability to put this into action, I will have changed the world. And I'm not saying that lightly. I like to help illustrate the difference by telling what we call the story of the orange. So imagine a situation where mom walks into the kitchen, her two teenage kids are fighting over the last orange in the kitchen. Mom rolls her eyes and says, guys, stop being silly, grabs the orange, cuts it in half, gives both the kids half an orange. Her daughter throws her half of the orange on the floor, stomps out, and mom follows her and says, hey, what's going on? And the daughter says, Mom, I was trying to make you a muffin recipe for Mother's Day, and it requires the rind of a whole orange, and half of an orange isn't going to be good enough. So now I have nothing. And the mom says, oh, you were trying to make me muffins for Mother's Day. Okay. And she goes and talks to her son, was equally upset, and says, hey, what's going on? Why are you so upset? Half an orange is clearly a fair solution. And the son says, I needed the juice of a whole orange to marinate this steak tonight, and now I don't have enough for the recipe. The juice of half an orange isn't enough. It won't be right. Mom goes, oh, if I had just walked into the room and said, hey guys, stop. Why are you fighting over the orange? We would have learned that one kid wanted the rind to make muffins for everybody, and one kid wanted the juice to make a marinated steak for everybody. And instead, by cutting it in half, neither of them got what they needed. And that really illustrates the idea of interests versus positions. The orange is a position. The interests are, I want to make muffins and I want to make steak and I need the rind of an orange and I need the juice of an orange. The why behind the what. So often in society, we fight over the what and we lose sight of those fundamental needs or interests behind those positions. We're fighting over the orange when really one of us just needs the rind and one just needs the juice. Or if we even got to the point of saying, hey, you want to make muffins, you know, there's a lemon. Do you want to try making it with a lemon? oh, that'd be delicious. I'd never thought of that. Right. And that's that creative potential. When we really get to interest, we can start to explore creative options for meeting our needs, our basic concerns. Whereas if we get stuck fighting over that orange, we have an intractable conflict where we feel like one of us is going to have to lose instead of us all winning by having muffins and steak. That might seem overly simplistic, but I really challenge you to think about things in life and think about how often we get fixated on positions, again, the what, some solution we're espousing to meet a need, and totally lose sight of our actual interests, the things underlying that position we're espousing. So I want to engage you all. I'm going to ask you to open up your chat. If you don't know how to do that, you should see on the bottom of your Zoom screen a chat button. I encourage you to open that up. Want to ask you to open up chat and take a moment and think about this question on the slide. Thinking about what I've just presented, what's one observation, one insight or question you have? Type your response into chat, but I'm going to ask you to not hit enter. Don't submit it for just a moment. Let's get everybody some time to enter their responses. So again, we're responding to that question in the chat or in the slide via the chat. Take a moment, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. It's also a great way to see who's actually still really with us, just saying. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. If you need more time, take it. No rush, just kind of curious to hear from you all what's resonating, what you're thinking. Looks like folks might need a little bit more time to enter. As you enter yours, you can take a moment and look through what each other are saying.
And make sure that it's your chat is to everyone.
Thanks for that reminder. So as maybe some of those come in, just some things I'm seeing are just the importance of trust and follow through, right? That's really core. Just the importance of communication. I'm seeing a question about is a lot of what we do managing personalities with a group of professionals. It's about helping people work together to problem solve and people bring their personalities to that. We often kind of joke about difficult stakeholders. There are some people who maybe are more challenging and maybe it's because they don't feel like they've been heard. So there's always a reason people are behaving the way they are. So I'm seeing some great questions. I'm going to put a hold on those and come back to them. Seeing some people saying, yeah, that story of the orange really like helped me reflect on maybe there were some times that didn't take time to understand the problem before trying to intervene. And lots of great observations. Please keep those coming in if you want to. So now I'm going to ask you another question, and I want you to just take a moment and sit with this for a moment. And there's no right or wrong answer, so however you feel is totally appropriate. When I say compromise, what do you think of, or how does it make you feel? What kind of feeling does it evoke? So take a moment, type your response in, but let's not hit enter for just a moment so folks can have some time to think. And if you're still entering responses for the last question, you can get those submitted. So when I say compromise, what do you think of, or how does it make you feel? Could be a one-word response, however you want to respond to that. When you're ready, you can enter your response in the chat and make sure it's going to everybody. If you need a little more time, take it. So I'm seeing some people just say better solutions, and some feel more of giving up a little of what you want to accomplish a goal. Some people feel like it's like giving in, like I wasn't heard in the discussion, forced cooperation, someone loses, win-lose more than win-win. So again, there's no right or wrong response to this. I do think it is important to recognize that if you look at the dictionary definition of compromise, it has this idea of somebody giving up something they really need, or basically kind of having to sacrifice to get to an agreement. And for most people, if I have you on screen, I'll say like, does it make you really inspired or not so inspired or somewhere in between? Most people say like somewhere in between or like not inspired. And that's fine. Again, however you feel is appropriate, but just recognizing for a lot of people, compromise isn't an inspiring goal. So when I say co-creation, what do you think of and how does it make you feel? Take a moment and think about that. When you're ready, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. And we'll give a little time for people to think and get responses entered. All right, when you're ready, hit enter. Again, if you need more time, take it. So I'm seeing folks say it feels more like partnership, feels more like kind of getting to a shared understanding and solution, more of a win-win, really working together for a best solution, seems more positive. I'm not a semantics person, but I do really like to reinforce that words have power. And if I say, hey, let's compromise, and you're like, ooh, I don't feel excited about that. Or I say, hey, let's really try to co-create something that works well for all of us, and that feels inspiring, that's the energy we're going to bring to that conversation and that effort. And so that's why I've learned to really appreciate that I want to talk about co-creation rather than compromise, and that really collaboration is a co-creation process, not what most people think of when they think of compromise. So most people, when they think of compromise, really think of a tit for tat concession. You give a little, I give a little, we sort of wheedle it down until we get to a lowest common denominator agreement, and okay, that's the best we could do. And inherent is that in that is the notion of sacrificing key interests or values. Again, not really that inspiring. Instead, co-creation, which is entirely possible, is really about, as we say, expanding the pie, turning it from a zero-sum game where like the pie is fixed to a non-zero-sum game where we can create value by working together, where you getting the juice and me getting the rind allows us to have muffins and steak that we can then share versus us fighting over an orange. And co-creation really is about meeting each other's key interests and honoring key values. And like I said, creating something new and better by working together. Maybe we're like, oh, let's try making these recipes with a lemon. We've never thought of that, right? We get creative because we're now in this creative space versus like, oh, I'm trying to protect myself. And really trying to get to outcomes that are, as we say, fair, efficient, stable, and wise. Meaning they work for all parties, they're fair, they're efficiently reached, they're stable, they actually get implemented, and they're wise in that they really solve the problems that brought us together in the first place. And co-creation, again, at its best, is innovating together. It's a creative process versus a fighting process. So one way of thinking about this is the difference between putting hot water and cold water together, which you get lukewarm water, and that's not usually very exciting, right? That's compromise. Instead, it's about putting milk and bananas and butter and all these yummy things together, and we get banana bread because we each brought some of those pieces and we put them together and got someplace better together. Okay, that's all great, but how do you do this thing, right? And I want to really say this is possible. I see people do it all the time. It's something all of us can do every day, and that we can act collaboratively, which is a way of being and a way of interacting. And we can also engage in collaborative decision making, which is kind of a more involved process. So on the left column, just ways of acting collaboratively, it is about that effective communication, speaking from interest, asking good questions, not jumping right into problem solve when you don't really understand what's going on. And just generally, like I said, focusing on interests and not positions, and helping other people understand their interests and speak from their interests. Why do you want this orange? What are you hoping to achieve from it? And avoiding sort of the no, what we call a block, and instead thinking yes and, right? Yes, you want the orange, and we can't all both have whole orange. Let's understand what we want from this orange. Or instead of no, you can't build there, or no, your business can't operate that way. Hey, I hear this is really important to you and we can't do this thing, but what else could we do to meet your needs? Right? Those are very different conversations. Behaving in ways that build trust, right? Really just following through. If you commit to something, doing it, listening, trying to understand, those are things that really build trust. Being honest and transparent, including about what we call your sideboards, right? These are the things I really can't do, and here's why, but here's what I can do, versus, like I said, just no, or I can't do that. And really don't assume. Instead, come into conversations, come into conflict settings, come into life, really trying to learn and trying to understand, approaching things with curiosity. If you have community members that are difficult to deal with, trying to understand what's going on for them. Or if you're trying to work with the city and you're running into roadblocks, trying to understand what's going on for them, rather than assuming they're just jerks, or they don't like you, or they're picking on you, or any variety of things that we can tend to assume. So that's sort of just something we can do every day and every moment of our lives. And we need a lot more of that in this society. And there's this collaborative decision-making thing, this like, we now need to reach some agreement on something and a process that goes into that. And some of the key things we need to do when we do collaborative decision-making are really engaging all key stakeholders. Who's affected by this decision? Who needs to be part of it? Can make it or break it? Really getting them to be meaningfully part of the decision-making process. Really clarifying and focusing on the issue of mutual concern, right? What is that thing that brought us together? Whether, even if we don't see eye to eye about it at all, right? So focusing on public health and economic impacts when we talk about COVID-19 responses, keeping that front and center, and all of our decisions should fall out from, these are things that affect us all. Using the right form of collaborative process. I won't go into like significant depth on that, but it could be just one meeting, we get together, we work through some stuff, or it might need to be many months of meetings and work together with joint fact finding, where we seek facts and information we can all agree on. Really committing to consensus wherever appropriate. And we talk about consensus not as unanimous agreement, but making sure that all key affected stakeholders are heard and considered, and that people's interests that we try to address people's interests to the best of our ability in any decision. Engaging in interest-based negotiation. I teach semester-long courses on that. If anyone really wants to learn how to do interest-based negotiation, come talk to me. But the basic idea is trying to find solutions that work well for all parties. Focusing on co-creation and innovation, creating that space to innovate together. We often talk about separating creating from committing, right? Of spending time saying, what can we do about this problem? Let's just brainstorm. Nope, let's not talk about who's gonna do what. Let's not commit to anything. Just brainstorm before we actually then talk about what are we actually going to do. Acting collaboratively, doing all that stuff in the left-hand column all the time, right? That's a big part of it. Where appropriate, investing in a situation assessment. Again, this is a process I can't talk about in depth, but the whole idea is going out, having lots of conversations with folks, doing research to understand the problem fully before you bring people together to try to intervene in the system or create solutions. And where appropriate or where necessary, investing in a neutral facilitator, investing in somebody like me who comes into conflict settings and has no stake in the fight, no dog in the fight, right? Like the outcome doesn't matter to me. I'm an advocate for good process and want to make sure all these things happen. And it might be that you might be involved in a conflict and you say, hey, I think we could really use a neutral facilitator, right? So even just thinking about that as a tool in your toolkit is helpful. So again, I want to take a pause, time out, check in with you all. So let's open up the chat again. And I'd like you to just take a moment and think, what is one observation or insight from what I just presented? Something that stood out to you, maybe you thought about a past setting and like, oh, this would have been helpful there, or oh, this worked really well in the past and I now see why. Just any observation or insight. Get the chat open, type your response in, but don't hit enter till I ask you to. All right, when you're ready, you can enter responses. If you need more time, take it. No need to rush. Just curious to hear what's landing with folks. So I'm seeing this notion of collaboration as a way of being, not just decision-making process. Yeah. One of the key things we work with people on is just how can you act collaboratively? How do you communicate effectively? And a big hint is effective communication is mostly about effective listening. And we talk a lot about asking questions instead of making statements. If you work with somebody who's a conflict resolution professional, you'll find that more often than not, they're just asking questions. They're just trying to understand rather than making statements. Like those are little things we can change about ourselves every day that are really impactful. Just how important our perception is and how that can, even just thinking about conflict is not inherently bad and saying that just is, let's work together on it. That's a huge perception shift that allows us to not be afraid of conflict, but just say, here it is, let's deal with it. Let's make it work well for us. And I'm seeing an observation that once somebody was in a negotiation setting and neither party was really willing to co-create. Everyone was in a compromise mindset, right? And probably in a defense mindset. I have to protect myself, otherwise you're going to take advantage of me, or otherwise I'm going to lose ground. And that's where you have to break that down. People have to be willing to come and be vulnerable, and not necessarily to like get taken advantage of. You can still protect yourself, but be willing to come together as thought partners, not as fighters, right? Not as in some battle, but in like, we've got something bringing us together. We've got to work on it together. Fundamental shift in how we think about things. There is magic in asking questions. Absolutely. Especially really good questions. Open-ended questions asked with curiosity go a heck of a long way in any setting, especially conflict settings. So lots of good observations. So I'm just going to ask folks if there's any lingering questions or concerns, you can type those into the chat. I'm kind of tracking what is coming up for folks, and hopefully we'll have a little time here at the end of today to address some of those questions. So feel free at your leisure to enter any questions that are coming up for you. And you don't necessarily need to answer this via the chat, but I really want everyone just to sit back and think for a moment. How well do you think you do with this collaboration thing, this sort of interest-based problem solving, acting collaboratively, engaging in collaborative ways? Again, you don't need to enter that in the chat, but just take a moment and think about that. And if you feel like, I'm actually pretty good at this stuff, awesome, great, let's keep working on that skill set. If you're like, now that I think about it, not the best at asking questions, not the best at listening, not the best at, I didn't even know about interests. Again, that's also great. And this is a skill all of us get to work on all the time. My students call it the being effective human class. And that's really, even those of us who are professionals, we're working on this stuff all the time. So keep questions coming in if you have any questions. I just want to conclude with a couple final points, which is basically most people aren't as good at collaboration as they need to be. Most of us don't get taught this stuff in school, maybe get taught a little bit in our families or in life, but this isn't really a skill set that we are encouraged to develop. Instead, in high school, we learn debate, right? We learn to argue, we learn to win arguments. That doesn't solve problems. Instead, we need to be learning how to engage in meaningful dialogue, how to negotiate with each other to find solutions that work well for all parties. And the idea, again, is not just to be nice, it's to find agreements that work really well for me, but also work well enough for you that we actually get something implemented and we can continue to work together. Right? Because you all know that if you piss off another business, or you piss off a client, or you piss off the city, or they piss you off, it's really hard to work together in the future. But guess what? You're probably going to have to work together in the future. And that's why we have to find ways to work together that work well for all parties. So business leaders, and again in air quotes or in quotes there, because I think, like I said, it's about exercising leadership or not. So if you want to be leaders, you need to be out there exercising leadership, mobilizing people to work together to problem solve, to thrive amid change. And really, like, to exercise leadership, you have to be good at collaboration. But I think to be effective just in running businesses and being part of the business sector, people need to understand this stuff. To be effective humans, we need to understand this stuff. And basically, as business owners or people in the business sector, you are part of the public sector, right? You rely on public services, but you also serve the public. And public sector concerns always center around some issue of mutual concern. Something is affecting the public or some segment of the public. That could be air pollution issues or traffic congestion or economic development. Could be this pandemic, right? There's always things that are affecting the public, and they're going to affect you. And people don't see eye to eye about those things, even though lots of people care about those things. And businesses and industry are key stakeholders in these public sector concerns. You're affected by those concerns, but you also have a role to play in addressing those issues. So since you're right in the middle of a lot of these public conflicts and decisions, you're also really well positioned to exercise leadership, right? To mobilize people to work together to problem solve. And I really encourage you all to think about that role you can play as exercising leadership, right? Not just showing up as a stakeholder and being upset or sharing your concerns, but actually trying to get people working together to solve these problems, to work together to address the COVID-19 concerns and find ways to keep our economy open and thriving, but also manage public health concerns, or to address air quality issues so people can move freely and healthfully through their communities and use your businesses, rely on your businesses. And I always joke, right? Like you're right in the middle of it. This is something you kind of have to deal with. And that's why you're really highly trained in conflict management and negotiation and collaboration and all of this stuff, right? Wrong, right? Most of us aren't. And that's why I'm on a mission to spread the good word and actually give people skills and resources to work together to problem solve. So just to emphasize some key takeaways, again, conflict just is. It's what we do with it that matters. It can be really destructive, or it can be actually highly productive. Effective communication is really key to making conflict productive and not destructive. And I should say, I often encourage people to think of estuaries, right? Where we have saltwater and freshwater come together, two different things coming together. Those are the most productive ecosystems. And just the same, different ideas, different perspectives coming together can be that productive space. When we need to make decisions or take action together, effective communication really entails collaboration, right? We have to lean into this interest-based negotiation challenge. And businesses and industry are really right in the middle of public conflicts and thus are really well positioned to exercise leadership, to mobilize people to work together to solve problems and foster a culture of collaboration. Most of us aren't as good at this collaboration stuff as we need to be. And I appreciate you all taking the time to learn some stuff today. I hope this is helpful to you. If you want to do a deeper dive, if you and others you know want to build this skill set, we're here to give you tools and resources. We do training, etc. And like I said, this really is a skill set any of us can, and I would argue need to learn to develop. So with that, I'm going to leave this slide up for a moment. It has my contact information. It also has a link to our environmental dispute resolution program. We also run an EDR blog that shares lessons learned about collaboration from all sorts of different sectors, not just the environmental sector. At the bottom there, you'll see a link to a handout, which is on key collaboration concepts. So it kind of captures all of our key takeaways about collaboration, and I'll also share that, make sure it goes out through the organizers. And with that, again, I'd encourage folks, if you want to submit any questions via the chat, we'll address some of those questions and things that have come up.
Yes, if anyone has a question, chat. I know you're all just, if you're like me, you're just thinking about this and it's just kind of going in and it's sitting for a moment to say, wow, we can really make a difference here if we can learn these skills. And so what questions do you have? Or what would you like to say?
That's what I note. I'm seeing some observations just about how relevant this stuff is for your personal life as well as your professional life. And I always emphasize that with my graduate students to say, these skills are going to be as relevant with your roommates and your loved ones as when you go out and work in the public sector. And I hope you all think about that as well, right? And even just practicing these skills with your kids or with your significant other or with your family. Like I know for me, I've had some broader family conflict and reminding everybody to not just be their best selves, but like, hey, we all have an issue of mutual concern. We're bound together by family. Let's work through this stuff and find some solutions that work well for all of us. So I see some questions coming in. I'm going to pop back to some of the ones that came up earlier, just share my thoughts on these. And I also encourage folks, if you want to either chime in potentially verbally or just share your thoughts on these things via chat, you're also welcome to do that. So how can you tell when you understand the situation well enough? That's a big question. Again, that's maybe a hard one to fully address here. We have skills and approaches for doing that. I think the thing is always approaching situations with the beginner's mind, again, with curiosity, with really trying to understand and asking those good questions. And a really good example of that is just asking people, what matters to you, right? What are you concerned about? And you start you'll start to illuminate either shared concerns. Usually we share a lot more concerns than we think we do, or areas of agreement and disagreement. And that helps you start to think about is there even an opportunity for us to work together on this thing? And if so, what does that look like? And so a really good example of what that looks like, and I'm going to kind of keep riffing off of COVID-19 because it's in our face every day. And I don't think we're doing the best job of working together to problem solve. If we go around and we talk with people, they'll say like, yeah, I don't really want my grandma to get sick. I don't really want to get sick, but I really don't want the economy to get shut down, right? Or I really don't want to be told that I can't go to concerts. You say, well, help me understand why. Help me understand why that affects you. And people say, well, I just want to be able to like have activities and things I can do. And I really don't want to wear a mask because it's uncomfortable. And you keep asking kind of the why questions till you start to really understand what matters for somebody. You start to say, okay, I hear that you actually do care about public health. That's important. You don't want to get sick. That's important. And I also hear that like you want a way to maybe promote public health that's more comfortable than wearing a mask. So maybe we think about mask comfort, other things we can work on to improve that. And I hear you saying that you want to be able to go and like have these activities. Is there some way we can still have some activities, but prevent super spreader events, right? Or provide other ways that people can continue to connect with things that are important to them, but don't create opportunities for mass spread of the disease. And when we talk to other people, we start to hear like, so they might even say like, I don't care about the economy. I just don't want to get sick. But you ask questions, you say, why? And they say, well, I don't really want the economy to be shut down, right? But I'm just so afraid of getting sick. And you start to hear all those things and you start to put together the like, again, there's actually a lot that we share in common, even though that might not be what we lead with. And there are areas we disagree about, but how can we solve those fundamental interests? So again, it really depends on the situation. And I don't know what, well enough can look like a lot of things. We as conflict resolution professionals have to get to a place that we feel we know who needs to be involved and how. You don't necessarily need to do that all the time, but I think you really want to get a sense of, am I understanding what's really like major concerns for people and what's really going on for them and what that issue of mutual concern is? Because it's not masks, right? It's COVID-19. We need to keep people coming back to those core things. Or it may not be, I'm just thinking like, it's really usually about economic development rather than one particular business or one particular policy. So I'm going to keep going through some questions. So I'm seeing, what if both kids need the juice of the orange? Again, I would ask why. Might say, well, I need the juice of the orange for my marinade and I need the juice of the orange for the muffins. And that's where we say, well, let's explore other things. What can we do to solve that problem? And mom might say, hey, if that's really the deal, I'll run to the grocery store and get another orange, right? Like that is a solution. Or it might be, we have a lemon. Does anybody want to try using a lemon? Right? So you get to if you really understand what's going on for folks, they want to make muffins and a smoothie or a marinade. You start to say, what are the other ways we can meet those needs? Because the juice of an orange isn't the only way to get there. So that's how I would maybe extend that analogy and address that question. So asking why, asking good questions, and then getting creative about how to meet those needs. Scrolling down. I'm seeing, do you teach classes? Sign me up. We do teach classes. We are on a mission to build skills and capacity everywhere. We are happy to work with organizations to tailor training specifically for your needs. We also have some standing trainings. My email, again, is here on the screen. I would encourage you, if you're interested in knowing more, just want some more tools and resources, or maybe want to look at some more training, whether through us or other organizations, shoot me an email. That way I have it there and I'll follow up with some additional information. Or if you or any other organizations, again, want to do a deeper dive, whether just like a 3-hour session with some skills, or we do like multi-month trainings with organizations, just let us know. And again, we can either direct you to other resources or we provide a lot of things in this area. We also do, just so folks know, provide facilitation and conflict resolution support. So if you have an issue and you're just like, hey, what do we do about this? You can get a hold of us. We'll maybe direct you to other resources. We do some facilitation ourselves, but very little. So mostly are doing training, capacity building. So just kind of putting that out there. And then I'm seeing a question. Recently, our team had to solve a problem. After several meetings and changing our direction again, still feel like we compromised. Get the sense that not everybody is on board and this might lead us to future discontent, right? And that's part of why compromise is problematic. When people don't feel like the agreement's a really good agreement, or they feel like they had to give something up that really matters to them, they're typically not happy about it. They start looking for better options. They're ready to get off board. They're ready to find other partners. So good question about that. And then the kind of ultimate question is, should we go back to the drawing board, even if it means changing direction for a third time? Unfortunately, our answer is always, it depends. This is a situation in where I would actually recommend what we call a situation assessment, like a mini version. I would go have some informal conversations with folks and say, hey, I just want to get a sense of, how do you really feel about this? Just like really want to hear your honest thoughts, and asking why, and those good questions of like, help me understand why you feel that way. And what you might find is actually everybody's pretty happy with it. And maybe just you were assuming not, or you were picking up on things that weren't really there. Or very likely you'll find people like, I don't love this, but I just like, it felt like the best we could get to, but I just don't see how it's going to work. And again, I'd ask like, why doesn't this work for you? Why don't you think it's the best agreement? What do you think could have been better? Why? Because really you want to get to those fundamental concerns that aren't being met. And sometimes through those conversations, somebody talks themselves into, actually, no, I think about it. It actually is a pretty good agreement. I just was really set on this position. They wouldn't say that word, but like set on this thing. And now I realize maybe I didn't need that thing to meet my needs. So sometimes those conversations actually help people clarify their interests and realize maybe this is okay for them. Or it's going to help illuminate what's not working about that agreement or about that decision, so that you could assess, is there something that could just easily be tweaked? We don't necessarily need to rethink the whole thing. Or do we need to step back and maybe rethink the whole thing? And if so, how do we do so in a way that gets people talking from their fundamental concerns and interests and trying to co-create solutions that meet those interests? So I think the answer is, you don't know whether you need to, but having some informal conversations could really illuminate whether this is all going to fall apart, and it actually is a good investment to put some energy into changing it, or whether actually people just are grumbling a little bit, but it's actually okay, or maybe there's not a problem at all. So again, another question that just came in, and I might take this as the last one and then wrap it up because I know noon was your guys' end time. The question is, I have some family members that have differing political views, and the recent election and COVID had caused some major disagreements. You are not alone if that is the experience you've had, unfortunately. Really causing some family members to get to a point that they want nothing to do with each other. And like it makes me sad to see this happen. And I've even seen a little bit of it in my family, which is typically so collaborative and bonded. So it's frustrating because I feel like we're family and we should be able to disagree, but still love each other. Any suggestions what to say to both family members and to bring them together? Good last question to end on. Again, I think this is probably relevant for most of us on the call. I think it's relevant for society. There are a few things I really want to emphasize. And one of them is that we really encourage disagreeing agreeably. It's okay to not see eye to eye. When did that become not okay? When did that mean that we can't be humans together, be family? We've made everything so personal. And this is a problem with like identity politics. We've made our politics about ourselves and our values and conflated those things, and it's playing out in families. So I think anything you can do in your own family to actually create space for, we don't have to see eye to eye. Let's learn from that. Let's see disagreement as an opportunity to learn. And we don't have to get on the same page. That's okay. I can still respect you as a human being. And actually through having those conversations, we can grow closer as a family. And so practicing really effective communication, asking good questions of, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'd really love to know why you feel that way. Can you tell me more? I'm so interested in that. Would you mind if I shared a little bit about why I feel this way? You don't have to agree with me. I'm not trying to change your mind. I just think it's an interesting conversation, right? And even creating that framing, where I'm actually encouraging a lot of families to have ground rules now. These are the rules we uphold as a family. And one of them can be, it is okay to disagree, but we have to do so agreeably. And that means really trying to understand, not necessarily to change hearts or minds, but to understand. Really think about how you're showing up as a listener. Are you listening to understand? Are you even listening? Or are you thinking about your rebuttal when somebody's talking to you? Again, that's something we spend a lot of time with people in training, because most of us realize, even if we've done active listening trainings, we're not actually effectively listening. We're not listening to understand. So really showing up that way and encouraging other people to, and not personalizing things. If somebody says, I think you're stupid because you feel this way, my response is, something's going on. You don't necessarily have to say this verbally, but you just say, something's going on for you that makes you feel so strongly. This isn't about me. What I can do right now as a good family member is listen, try to understand, validate you without necessarily validating your opinion or your perspective. I can say, hey, I see you feel really strongly about this. I do too. And you don't have to say, I agree that so-and-so is a jerk, or this is a problem, or that COVID should just go away overnight. You don't agree with the opinion, but you can validate the person. And that goes a really long way in all conflict. And that's a yes and example of, yes, I see you feel really strongly. And I'm not sure that's the best way to solve this problem, but I'd love to figure out together, like, what do we think needs to happen? What could happen? And I do think that just reminding people of the issue of mutual concern. And in this case, part of it is, hey guys, we're family and we want to work together as a family. And the world's kind of crazy right now, and we don't necessarily have to see eye to eye about it, but I want us to support each other. How can we do that? How can we create space for all of us to feel the way we feel and still work together as a family? Bring people together to find solutions, empower everybody as part of the problem-solving enterprise, rather than coming in with here's the solution, here's what we're going to do. And even ask a question of, would it be helpful for us as we go into Thanksgiving to have ground rules for our conversation? Like, let's make it fun. Let's make it kind of jokey, but like, it would be helpful maybe for us to have ground rules for the Thanksgiving conversation, right? But instead of saying, this is what we're going to do, ask people, do we want to do this? And when we feel we're part of the solution, that goes a long way for our buy-in. So that's just a brain dump of some things that come to mind for me. I hope there's something in there that resonates with folks. I think the key thing is just recognizing that if we can't do this with our own families, it's going to be really hard to do it as society, and we need to do it as society. So let's start practicing with our families and empower other people in our families to be part of the problem-solving enterprise. And through doing so, maybe we can have a broader impact in our communities and maybe more broadly in our country. So with that, I'm going to stop because we're kind of at the noon point, and I'll pass it back to the organizers.
Thank you so much, Danya. So much to think about, isn't there? Um, we have, this has been really, really great. Just like with the rest of our speakers today, I hope, at least, I hope that you have felt the same way I have, and that it's been something that is beneficial to you, whether it's been in resiliency and leadership, in this collaboration and conflict resolution, that you have gained knowledge that will help you in your businesses, that will also help in our community, strengthening our community, but also, as Danya said earlier, take this to your personal life as well, and to be able to engage with each other in a different, with a different mindset, in a different way of communication and collaboration. Again, thank you so much, Danya, for being with us today. We really appreciate all that you've shared with us, your knowledge and your wisdom. With that, before we leave, we have two gifts to give away. And so those of you who were on for this last section, we'll draw for that first, and then we will draw for those of you who have stayed on for the entire business summit will be in the drawing for the grand prize. So Heather, we'll turn the time over to you back and give a closing. And thank you. We wanted to thank our sponsor, which is Rich Cope from Keller Williams Real Estate. He provided the gift cards and the cash prize for those of you who are who participated today, and for those of you that won. Again, we want to thank all of the chambers for joining us today. The Payson Santaquin Chamber, the Spanish Fork Salem Chamber, and Springville Mapleton Chamber. I think it's been a great morning, and I really appreciate you joining us. It's hard when we have to switch to everything to Zoom, but I hope you've gotten as much out of it as I had. Just to let you know, you did see that we were recording these individual sessions. They will be put on the Spanish Fork Salem Chamber YouTube tomorrow. You can review them, you can send them out to friends and colleagues, those who weren't able to join us together. Again, tomorrow at the Spanish Fork Salem Chamber YouTube channel. With that, I just wanted to say thank you and have a wonderful day, and thank you for being with us.